The familiar refrain from Shakespeare is that theater holds a mirror up to nature, but theater is more than reflect its time. It helps us see the world and ourselves more clearly. Today, truth often feels stranger than fiction. When inherited forms no longer seem capable of containing reality, theater must adapt. Jacob Adler was one artist who did this for his community. A towering figure in the Yiddish Theater of New York City, he was also the father of the famed acting teacher Stella Adler, one of the artists who helped shape modern American acting. We often think of Stella Adler as having learned her craft from Stanislavski, and this is partly true, but she may have also learned as much, if not more, from her father, a giant of the Yiddish stage. Understanding Jacob Adler and the history of the Yiddish theater may help us better understand American theater, where it came from, what it has lost, and how it might meet the demands of our own moment. Dov Hassan is a friend and colleague who serves as the head of the theater department at Chabot College in Hayward. He is currently writing a book about his great-great-great-uncle, Moshe Shore, and other members of the Yiddish theater, including Jacob Adler. The book is a kind of double memoir. It tells the story of Moshe's life while also tracing Dov's own journey of discovering him and uncovering his family's connection to the Yiddish theater. Dov is an extraordinary student of theater and theater history, and it was an absolute joy to speak with him about his research, his family's story, and the book he is currently writing. If you would like to get in touch with Dov, please send me a message, and I will be happy to facilitate a connection. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hi, Dov.
Hi, Michael.
Welcome to what I'm calling the Seeing Place.
Oh,
How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. Yeah, good.
Good,
Yeah,
good.
good to see you.
Um, so yeah, you're writing a book, and so I wanted to get to talk to you
Comedy.
about it.
Yes, great.
Yeah,
Nice.
I mean, maybe we can start with just how the genesis of it, and maybe how your sabbatical has been going so far.
Well, the sabbatical part's over.
Oh.
Well, that was I was back teaching this whole year.
Oh,
So, but yeah, the sabbatical was very helpful in doing the project. So yeah, I can sort of frame the project for you and talk about that a little bit. So the focus of the book is the inspiration of the book is learning about a three times a great uncle who was a playwright in Yiddish theater, and I found out about that because my grandmother, who's still alive, she's 104, she's about to be 104. This is about 8 years ago or so. So she's in her late 90s, and she had this piece of cardboard. She's like, showed it to me. It's like, I mean, you might be interested in this. I don't know. And it was the cardboard. I'd never seen it before, but and I don't know why she thought of it in that moment. I really don't know, and where it took her so long. but the piece of cardboard was this would have been in like the early 60s, I suppose, before I was born. She sat down with her father, who was elderly at that time, and he just sort of told her some family stories and told her about relatives and on both his side and his wife's side, my great grandmother. So this is my great grandfather talking to my grandmother and telling family stories. And on the cardboard, she kind of did the best she could to write out a family tree. So it has all these names and lines and connections, and family trees are not easy to put down on paper, but she did her best. And there's little details next to some of the names. Um, and one of the names had some really intriguing details next to it. There's a Moshe Shore, who was my great grandfather's uncle, so my grandmother's great uncle. It says, I think I have this verbatim. It was Moshe Shore sold play Das Pintele Yid to actor Fishson for 200 rubles in Odessa. And I looked at, I was like, what is this? I've been doing theater since I was 8 years old, putting up, school play, and been fascinated by it ever since. And I have no known relatives in theater. I grew up in an artsy family, but everybody's like painters and writers and everything. And so it was immediately intriguing to me just because it was a theater person. So I was like, there's a theater person in the family? What? And then, Das Pinteliid, I didn't know what any of it meant. So it just was like a great mystery, but also just really intriguing. So that was really the initiating point. I asked her, she really didn't have much to share beyond that. It's like, yeah, I think I remember as a kid, there was a playwright in the family, but, she didn't have much more to share. But the next time I was in New York, I went to the YIVO Center, which is a major one of the most important Jewish archival institutes in the world, and they have all kinds of stuff. And one of their major collections, or focus is Yiddish, writings that were in Yiddish, and literature, and all that. So I just went into their database. I typed in the name Moshe Shore, and it was just sort of like, let's see what happens. Who knows? I knew I had nothing else to go on but his name, and up popped like they had 6 archival boxes there in their archives. So I checked them out, and they brought them out, a couple at a time, and they're just packed with all these manuscripts, like plays. Clear, I could tell there's everything's in Yiddish, so I couldn't read anything. I mean, there was a few notes, there's some letters, there's some, it's not just plays. There's other things. There was one play translated into English, and there was a few notes and whatnot. But you can, and I can tell with the Yiddish, well, on the page you can tell if it's a play, because you tell it's, the way it's laid out, character, and what they say in the dialogue format. So I could tell it was plays, and some of them were handwritten, some were typed, some were in just old essay notebooks where the whole notebook was just a play. So all over the place, and a lot of it, crumbling and decrepit. Some of it not so much, and then a lot of pages of handwriting in Yiddish. And I don't speak Yiddish. I didn't speak Yiddish. My grandmother grew up in a family that spoke Yiddish, but they didn't really teach her, so she kind of at this point knows some words. She's not fluent by any means. I don't have any family members who are. So it was exciting and frustrating. Here's this amazing, oh my God, here's like, it worked. Like, it was like, hitting the jackpot on the first, on the first roll, like, whoa. So from there, I gradually, started poking around to find out what I could, but it wasn't, I realized I wanted to know more. I was, sort of obsessed right from that moment, but to get to a point where I could understand the Yiddish, that was far off. And then even translation, I didn't even know, well, what do you do? How do you even do that? And I'm sure there's going to be money involved, and like, it's a lot of material. So for my initial move was just like, well, I don't know anything about Yiddish theater. I've heard of, I know of it, but I knew basically nothing. So I thought, well, I'll read about it. I'll learn about Yiddish theater. At least I'll learn kind of his context. And I kind of knew roughly his lifespan was sort of mid 1800s to mid 1900s, and I knew that was roughly the era of Yiddish theater. And I knew that it had big impact in New York, and, some of the very basic things. And I knew a few words in Yiddish, the ones that, like, kind of everybody knows. So the first book that I read just from that, just on that journey was, I don't even know how I came across it. The first book I came across was a book that was written, it was the memoirs of Jacob P. Adler, Jacob Pavlovovich Adler, which was not actually a familiar name to me, except for the name Adler, because Adler, anybody who's in theater and acting knows of Stella Adler. But I had never heard of Jacob Adler, and I read the book, and and it turns out, of course, Jacob Adler was Stella Adler's father. And his book is this really, it's incredible. It's a great read. I mean, it's his memoirs with some annotations by a contemporary scholar. And it just sort of tells the whole story, because he's one of the most important figures in Yiddish theater. It turns out Stella Adler's father is like, he's on the, he'd be on the Mount Rushmore of Yiddish theater figures. He's up there. There's just no doubt about it. And all these anecdotes are so fun, and it's great. And it's just just learning the history of Yiddish theater through his lens, through his story. And I was so inspired by that. That alone was like, oh my God, this is a whole world I know nothing about. How come I don't know about any of this?
Yeah.
And so when I would go, I'd visit New York, and I would go back to YIVO, and I would look at the notes again. And each time I had a little more knowledge. And then I started taking Yiddish classes, and I learned that at least I could make out words. I couldn't necessarily understand everything, but I started at least getting enough familiar. I could understand the characters, and that was fun, just to get that knowledge. And then, so when it was time, I was able to apply for a sabbatical through my teaching job. I decided, I knew I was going to focus on this. I wasn't exactly sure how, but what I decided was I was just going to do a big research project on my uncle in Yiddish theater, and I didn't know what I would find. That's basically where I started. So that kind of got me rolling on it. So
Yeah. So, maybe, but did you find that your uncle knew Jacob?
I'm sure he did. Oh, well, 100% he knew Jacob
Oh, wow.
without a doubt, because in my research, I found I've got one program, in fact, that is he's in the play. So my uncle was a playwright primarily, but he was also a producer, an impresario of theater, an actor, and whatever the other things are.
Yeah,
As a
yeah,
director, I mean, all of it. And so there was a celebration. I've got this program that was a celebration of Jacob Adler's 60 years old, and his 50 years in theater, whatever it was. It was some big marker. He was such a huge figure. And my uncle's actually in the play with his wife. They're both cast in the play. So obviously, it's not his play, but he's
hmm
in that. So he wasn't, there were other major figures that Moshe worked with more than Jacob Adler. But I mean, you start reading it, it's sort of like, you get to know Bay Area theater, and it's like, oh, kind of everybody kind of knows everybody. Oh, actually, you go work in Iowa, it's like, turns out somebody knows somebody, and it's like, oh, you're in, it's just, it becomes that. And Yiddish theater was only really, it's really intense period of time was about a 70-year arc. So you think about all these people, and a lot of people started in Europe and then picked it up in New York and in other parts of the world, but that's the major move. And so there's so many shared stories and so many overlaps, and people working in Europe and then in New York and then back in Europe, and all these ways. And so it's a big family. So
Yeah.
people get to
So,
know each other.
um, so why do you think we don't know about the Yiddish theater as a part of our history, or about part of like American theater history?
That's a it's a I think it's an important and it's a complicated answer and a complicated question, and a lot of it has to do with Jewish culture. And you know, that opens it's a big answer. I think I can only answer it in a big way. Um, I think um, the Jews who were migrating, that period of time. So Yiddish theater really comes over to the United States in the late 1880s, but it's only a few years after it even starts in Europe. And then there's this massive migration wave in the late 1800s of Jews coming from Eastern Europe. For about 6 years. Its first year, 6 years it really thrived in Russia, but then a new czar came in and shut it down, and so it was banned. And so from that time, there was a kind of a westward move starting to happen with theater. And then as things got really bad with pogroms and economics in Eastern Europe, really were horrible, and Jews were just in really rough times. In the 1880s and especially in the 1890s. So there's that massive wave of migration happens of Jews that's more familiar to people who know about that era. As with other, Europe was broke and it was, all those problems. But all the artists came too, and so all these theater artists come over. But Jews were coming from such oppressed situations. It wasn't. Sometimes were better than others, but generally speaking, it was Jews were on the bottom of the caste system essentially. And when they came to America, it wasn't necessarily they didn't want to be Jewish. That wasn't going to be emphasized. It was about assimilation. I mean, the
Right.
drive was really assimilate, assimilate, assimilate. And so when your focus is to assimilate and not be separated out and not end up in the same horrible situation, that's not really what you want to necessarily the first thing you're going to identify in the larger, culture.
Mhm.
And that I and that's and so that's a piece of it. So Jews weren't promoting themselves as Jewish artists.
Right.
They were one and Hollywood's actually, there's this Hollywood is, I mean, all the big studios were led by Jews, all of them except for one, I think, were immigrants. And so there's obviously all this Jewish culture and energy going into developing Hollywood, and Broadway already existed, but the infusion of Jewish energy into musical theater and all,
Yeah.
Gershwins and all of that. These are all, they're kind of separate tracks.
Hmm.
So, the where, so, and in Yiddish theater, how that's happening, sure, it's about Jewish culture and it's Jews talking to Jews and there's a celebration and an investigation. It's an incredibly diverse and interesting artistic move, but it's all in Yiddish. So
Hmm.
Yiddish goes away because Jews assimilate.
Hmm.
And they're not going to teach the two generations in, nobody's speaking Yiddish, and, be a doctor, join society, and Jews were very successful. And of course, coming to America, there's also the more oppressed groups were based on skin color,
Right.
so Jews could pass. And so why get in that
Yeah.
zone, when you can? And so there was a lot. So as Jews succeeded, there was an emphasis on how it wasn't even about being Jewish. It was just about being white, essentially, and being part of this culture. And they were being very successful in the entertainment industry. And
Yeah.
so, I guess that's my answer. I mean, I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
it's the language. It's the language component is a major factor,
Yeah.
and the drive to assimilate. But I truly, just to say one other thing about it, I really think it's an amazingly missed theater movement.
Mm.
I really think it holds up with. I mean, in school we all get kind of this same Western sieve through the theater lens, and a movement such as Commedia, which everybody knows about Commedia. We learn about it. It's hugely impactful. It's very important. It kicks off this whole move, the Renaissance, and all that. But Yiddish theater does a different thing, but it's just as
Rich.
impactful and
Yeah.
and vital in its way, but in a different way.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can talk about, I mean, when reading some of the book, well, I guess two things. Like, I think this was in the book, and then part of this is maybe a conversation I had with you. But one image from the book that I just kind of was taken aback by was, if I have this right, like 30,000 people came out for Jacob Adler's funeral.
Yeah,
That blows my mind.
right.
I mean, at
Yeah, it
that,
blew
at
my
least,
mind when I read that. I was like,
oh
oh
my
God.
God, like
Yeah,
30,000 people today would be I mean that today that's Jesse Jackson's funeral
right.
that just happened or something, and so I guess I was struck by that, and then having not heard of this person, that was interesting. And then there was another story about, if I have this right, that Jacob Adler was going to do, was it Fiddler on the Roof on Broadway or something, but
Merchant,
then Merchant.
Merchant of
Oh wow.
Venice. Yeah. No,
Wow.
you want to tell that
No, I
story?
want you to
Yeah,
tell the
yeah,
story.
yeah. So yeah. Yeah. Well, so at that point he was well established and he was well known, and it's such an interesting cultural dynamic happening because there's sort of that waspy Anglo theater happening on Broadway, and then everybody knows about this Jewish theater downtown and Lower East Side, and there's a lot of respect for it. For theater people, they get this is real theater happening down here.
Yeah,
There's some
yeah,
heavy
yeah.
stuff going on, and he was recognized as for his abilities as an actor. And so there were some producers who were like invited him to be part of a production on Broadway of Merchant of Venice playing Shylock. But his response was, I mean, they weren't going to do a show in Yiddish on Broadway, and his response was like, I don't really feel comfortable enough with the English language to perform in English. I can only I can only do that in Jewish and in Yiddish. And they told him, okay, we'll keep Shylock will speak in Yiddish, and everybody else
Wow.
will speak English.
Wow.
And it actually he did it actually he did it twice. I don't tell the story in the book that way, but he the first time he was very resistant to it, but eventually he got talked to it, and eventually it was done, and it was kind of a hit. And it's really one of the really cool things. Stella Adler writes a really beautiful description of his performance as Shylock in the I think it's in the foreword to his memoirs, the memoirs. But his take on the trial scene was really interesting. And the typical way to do the trial scene for Shylock is he's a defeated man who's just leaves utterly broken, and that's kind of the action of the play, right? These characters just destroy him, rightly, wrongly, however you want to judge it, and he goes away as this broken, crushed individual. Because the final move in Merchant is they force him to become Christian, right? That's the ultimate one, is that not only is they take away his possessions, they take away essentially his identity. I mean, they take away his religious practice. But he falls to the floor. Adler falls to the floor as all this is coming down on him, as this judgment is happening, and he's broken and down. But his last physical gesture is to rise up and look at everyone and then leave the stage with this look that says, like, you can take everything from me, but you can't
Mm,
take my Jewishness.
mm,
It's just this empowering move,
yeah, yeah,
just this big fuck you, just like, you know,
yeah,
you can't destroy me. And it was it's just a really beautiful
yeah.
and powerful and memorable moment in the way it's described. So anyway, yeah. So he does this. He does Merchant of Venice in Yiddish on Broadway.
Um,
I wish I could see that. I mean, I don't. There's like a couple of photographs of it. That's like all that
yeah.
exists. But
I mean, that's
how'd
a
that
way to do
work?
it now. Like
Yeah,
that would be compelling now.
sure.
I'm thinking because
Let's
Lisa.
do it, Michael. Let's do it.
Oh yeah, we'll see. Um,
It'll take me
uh,
about 5 years to learn it, but yeah.
it's the opposite. Someone learning Yiddish. That's a
Yeah,
concept.
yeah.
Lisa is teaching our acting fellows, and she was taught by Stella. She was taught
Right,
by Stella Adler. So I was just kind of thinking about the lineage and of it all. When we think about commedia, it has a form to it has it had a unique form to it.
right,
And when we think about Stella, at least the way I was taught, the lineage goes back to Stanislavski. It's like Stanislavski had these ideas, the school of thought, this whole system, and then it broke up. And there's like Lee Strasberg and Stella and like Meisner and all this. But I'm wondering in the Yiddish theater if it had a specific kind of form or, like was it realism? I mean, was it? Do you know what I mean?
yeah. No, I do know what you mean. And it was when it started. It was in the earliest days. Well, the initial impulse. So there's a man named Avram Goldfaden who's credited with being, he's referred to as the father of Yiddish theater, and his inspiration, Yiddish Jewish culture was changing. That's a whole story all by itself. There's a huge shift in Jewish culture, move towards secularism, and so an opportunity arises for there actually to do theater, to do something more secular. It's just sort of matches the Christian, the non-Jewish arc of the you know moving into how theater came out of the church and all that. But so so in the beginning, he had really high aspirations and he really wanted to teach Jews, who were often uneducated and didn't have opportunity. You just want to lift the culture up, and through understanding, through education, through it's really sort of the classic. I want to do deep, meaningful theater that's going to really move the people and teach them and get them connected with humanity and all that. And it turned out that was a hard way to sell tickets. And you know what sells tickets? You know what really sells tickets? He's like, I think of it, maybe he's the first one to go like, guess we better do a musical. So, so he was actually known. He was actually kind of famous at that point among Jews and Yiddish literature. He was a poet and a songwriter, and many of his songs were already in the culture. And so he kind of went to, well, jokes and, fart jokes and music. Let's see how that goes. And it sold a lot of tickets. And so in the beginning, it was a lot of music, a lot of crude humor. A lot of the characters were sort of poking fun at, Jewish archetypes. And a lot of them would take, the wedding would often be critical part of the story. I think that's because, you can have a lot of different characters and a lot of develop there. So that's in the initially. And then and that's kind of what came over to America from Europe. That was pretty much the form. Although there was moves and experimentations with more less music, more serious drama and all that. But there was a turning point that Jacob Adler was very important in. He recruited a writer who'd recently come up from Russia, who was a journalist who he talked into becoming a playwright, named Jacob Gordon. And Jacob Gordon, and he shared with him, like, here's the dream. Jacob Adler wasn't really a singer, so he was always compromised in that way, and he really was holding on to that dream of like doing like dramatic, important theater, and so he got Jacob Gordon to start writing in that way, and that was a pivotal moment. And once there's this kind of a funny anecdote about that. Adler's on stage and they're doing this first production of this play called it's called The Jewish King Lear. I mean, but in Yiddish, and it's inspired by Lear. It's really not the Lear story. There's a patriarch with money and he's dividing up, to his, but it's really about the tension between between an assimilating generation, the younger generation, and the immigrant generation, which was a an important story for the day. But it's dramatic. There's no music. It's really dramatic, and the heartfelt feelings, and you
Mm.
know we probably call it melodramatic now, but
Hmm.
it's intense. And he's doing the play, and the audience is booing. They're not having it. They're not into it. And he stops. I don't know, somewhere in the play, like an intermission or whatever, after the first act, he stops, he walks down stage, he goes to the audience, who all know him and love him. It's that, you have a relationship with your audience, enough people in the crowd, you're actually talking to people who show up all the time. And he goes, stop eating nuts and listen to this. This is different. This is a different kind of theater. We're doing something different. You got to listen to it in a different way. And so he got them
Wow.
listen to the play differently. And at the end, they're standing and applauding, and it was a hit. And that moment like shifted Yiddish theater, and it set off a whole new move, which was to do heavy drama. And these people were, these folks were, they were very influenced by all this incredible, European, Goethe and Schiller and Ibsen and all that, Chekhov and all that amazing European literature. But there was nothing, no plays in Yiddish. I mean, they had to basically create a canon of plays instantly. And
Yeah.
so, Gordon wrote tons of plays. And then, so that set off a new era. And then there was another artist named, his name's slipping right now, but he's another one of the major figures. But then he starts getting really experimental. So they get into more, as it's the same art movements that everybody else has experienced, expressionism and impressionism, and things get more abstract. And you know uh I'm forgetting, what's the artist's name, the famous Jewish artist with the fiddler, um Chagall. Like
Hmm.
Chagall is designing sets, and so there's all
Yeah.
design is becoming much more adventurous. I mean, they did everything.
Yeah.
But the major moves are that, the goofy, sillier stuff, which actually makes a return later on. So it covers all those
Okay,
bases.
so I have two questions.
Yeah.
One is about the first question is have you translated your grand great uncle's plays? Like have you been able
I
to read
only have
them?
three.
But you've read them.
I have only really, really read one of them. So this is that's a response to like where my whole project is,
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah,
what
yeah.
I've done is I did what I really could easily do, which is I could research and learn about the era, and I could learn, and I found handwritten memoirs by my uncle actually are there. I've only been, but translation is expensive,
Yeah,
and I had
yeah.
limited means, and so I couldn't just be like, let's just translate everything and read
Yeah,
it all. So
yeah.
where I'm at is like I've told his life story, and I've told the story of Yiddish theater, and some of what I've been describing here. But the next phase to get to where I want it to be, where it's actually fully a book, is I haven't really taken him on as an artist. So
Mm,
I haven't read enough of his work, or frankly, enough of there's not that many plays that in the whole canon of Yiddish theater. I mean, there's, I don't know, probably thousands of plays, but not that many have been translated. And so I want to read more of those and read his work and be able to write to how he fits in
yeah.
to the whole thing. But I get the sense he was a translator. He was fluent in 4 or 5 languages. He translated Faust, I think was a pretty major production that he was the
Yeah.
translator on. He did a few like that, from German, from Russian. Um, yeah,
I guess that's kind of, I mean, this is, I have another question, but like there could be a whole treasure trove of plays. I mean, like
yeah,
Chekhov is translated, like like
right.
there's potentially a whole treasure trove of Yiddish plays that have not. that an English
Oh,
speaking
there's
is that
tons.
true?
There are tons of plays. The thing is that like it's hard to know. Like I don't think, and from the scholars that I've read and met with and everything, the general feeling is that there's some terrific plays, but there isn't like even as important as Gordon was, he wasn't really writing on Ibsen's level or
Yeah,
Chekhov's
yeah,
level. But a lot of that is because they're writing fast.
right.
And, where Ibsen is like, I don't know, well, he was, I don't know if he was independently wealthy, but he had plenty of time to write. And so
Yeah,
he could sit with a doll's house and spend 3 years writing it and crafting it and getting everything just tight and perfect.
right,
And Gordon's like writing a play a week,
right,
literally. I mean,
right.
like the plays, in its really heyday of Yiddish theater, they're there are movies, they are sitcoms, they are soap operas, they are heavy dramas. It's doing all of it, and people are going to the theater, and they're doing like a different show every day. It's
Yeah,
not like here's our season of 4 plays. Like they're just constantly cranking out new
yeah,
material and repeating things and bringing things back. So I I,
yeah,
I want to hear your next. I do have a thing about the
yeah.
Stanislavski Adler thing,
No,
but
please. Yeah,
maybe we
yeah.
come back to that. Oh, so this is part of the big miss of not having Yiddish theater in education, and this kind of missed piece of history, just theater history, let alone Jewish history. So yes, we all get taught this same. The origin story for contemporary acting starts with Stanislavski. Stanislavski comes to America. He, there's the Moscow Art Theater production of which is the a Chekhov play. I forget, it was the Seagull, I think it is. But at any rate, they do a Chekhov play. All these young American actors go see it. They're completely blown away by its authenticity and the realism. Like, whoa, what is this? And so they're all fascinated. They want to learn about Stanislavski. Stanislavski has a book. They don't actually work with Stanislavski. They
Mhm.
have his one of his books, an actor prepares. And so they're interpreting this book like it's the Bible. And they're like, okay, so that means it should be this. And so these actors, some actors form the group theater. The group theater is a kind of a think tank on acting. They spend 10 years arguing and working and developing ideas. Ultimately, the group breaks apart, but out of that group come these really important acting teachers. So Lee Strasberg, Stanislavski, Meisner, not Stanislavski, sorry, Strasberg, Adler, Stella Adler, Meisner is now the bit hot name, but these guys are all in there trying to understand Stanislavski and how do you get to that realism? How do you get there? And there's a major split between Adler and Strasberg. Strasberg takes this idea of personal reflection, of sense memory as being the most important thing. And his thing is like to dig into your own psychology and find the rawness and the emotions or whatever that you can associate with the character you play. And Adler's point of view is completely different. It's all about imagination and invention and being creative with what the playwright is offered.
Mhm.
She actually goes to Europe, encounters Stanislavski, tells him to his face, "You've made me hate acting." She couldn't stand what they were doing with the group
Oh
theater.
my gosh.
Stanislavski tells her, "Well, you need to study with me." And so she spends 2-3 weeks just one on one working with Stanislavski. And so she gets to have this real exchange with him about what his ideas are. She goes back to New York. She goes back to the group and she tells them all, I just studied with Stanislavski. We're doing it wrong. All this is wrong. You have the wrong approach. Basically, for the rest, after the group theater breaks up and they establish their studios, and each of these studios establish, there's basically a kind of a battle between Adler and Strasberg that never stops in a way.
Mhm.
And a key figure in that is Marlon Brando. So people sometimes will attribute Brando's teaching to Strasberg because Strasberg was a bit of an egotist and willing to take on any credit he could, whereas Adler was a little more, to my thinking. I mean, obviously I favor her. I'm not really into Strasberg's teaching. I've experienced it. It's not for me. But she. Where was I with that? So
Adler and Strasberg,
yeah, right.
each
Yeah,
other,
yeah.
and then
So
Marlon
they,
Brando.
but so the truth is that Marlon Brando was really Stella Adler's student,
I
and
see.
he says it in multiple places. How important she was to him. So that's that story we get, right? And then so then there's Brando. Brando does this production of Streetcar Named Desire, which just knocks everybody out in New York, and all of a sudden it changes acting. And like it just does. I mean, it's just one of those moments that happens. You know, you hear Jimi Hendrix, everybody plays guitar different after that. You know, he's that figure. But his teacher is Stella Adler. And so, and then after Marlon Brando, all of acting changes, acting teaching changes, the next generation and the next, to the point that now what Marlon Brando was doing is just like, that's what we do. This is what everybody does. You have to be able to do that. So if you look at it, so now that's the story. Stanislavski to group theater to the teachers to Brando to on and on. But it misses this whole thing. The first time Stella Adler was on stage was as a 3-year-old held in a play in Yiddish that her father was the lead in and had written. So there was this part. She has the closing line of the play. And he holds her, she describes this. He's holding his 3-year-old little girl in his hand out to the audience so she can say say the last line of the play, just with all this pride. And it's his audience, and it's all people who know, they get what's going on. He's showing off. And he had like 10 kids and he taught all of them acting. He's showing off his daughter, his beautiful 3-year-old, delivering this line in Yiddish. Of course, it got a standing ovation, applause. I mean, how about that for a debut, right? Like that's your first acting experience, right? And so my point being that that's when she started with this man who's like a god in Yiddish theater, great actor. And it wasn't until she's in her 20s that she knew anything about Stanislavski. So sure, she was heavily influenced by Stanislavski, yes. But she'd learned acting in Yiddish theater.
She'd learned theater.
She'd learned theater, right? All of these sensibilities around what it is to perform, to be dramatic, all this stuff. And so while there's major influence from Stanislavski, if you're really going to talk about where her juice is coming from, you can't take out that part. It's at least equal, if not more. I mean, we learn so much more by the time we're 20 than we do after we're 20.
Right.
So that's this, that's just that. And I think that there's something in Jewish culture, its particular way of, every culture has its own ways of being performative, of being dramatic, of being expressive. And Jews have been working on being that way in the theater context in a very intensive way. And she was an inheritor of a very powerful artistic movement that she grew up in the middle of. And that's a way in which we are influenced today by Yiddish theater that is not said, that is a hidden, is a hidden legacy and truth.
So, I remember graduating from BU with a BFA, 4 years of intensive intensive acting training, great training. And I remember sitting on the curb, I was graduate and you're like, oh shoot, my parents can't pay my rent. Like now
real life. Oh God.
Okay. Like this acting thing. What am I doing? And I just remember feeling, I mean, there were many questions that came up, but one that like persisted and really kind of led me to starting a company was a question of like, what is this tradition that I'm a part? Like theater for me at the time, it was sort of this derivative slash kind of pathway to TV and film fame. Like,
right.
And it took me a long time to realize that I loved theater as a form as much as I loved acting. And I had to kind of figure that out for myself. But I even though I studied theater history and stuff, I didn't feel like I could grasp a sense of tradition or like in America, particularly, like it felt all European or something. Like there was like what is, and then it gets to this larger question, which part of the assimilation quandary gets at, which is like, what is the American, like, what is this? It's a strange, but that all gets to the story that you told about Jacob Adler standing in front of his audience and confronting them. Because I think about it a lot. I mean, there's a couple of things. Like one is, my view is that the theater of a time and a place and a culture somewhat got going to be determined by the dominant culture of its day. And so it's
Sure.
responding to it, like
Right. Right.
um I don't I, a good example here, but maybe Stanislavski even maybe that realism doesn't have the vibrancy it once did because we now today have 60 years or whatever of TV, of
Right.
film. And
Right.
so it's actually like when I go to the theater, I don't know if I want to see TV and film on the stage.
Right.
Maybe I want to see something else or even the kinds of work that you're doing. But it also takes to scold your audience like that takes like a real community. Like it takes a
Yeah.
real
Yeah.
culture and a real community. Like it's hard for me to, but and I think about that a lot because the theater both wants to create that and sit within it. Like it's sort of a reflexive thing. Like it brings everyone together to watch it, and then it's trying to offer back a mirror to that community. But it's not. It's more than a mirror. It's sort of like you get to feel you're a part of it together. But to scold it means that to do something like that means that you trust that it's not just transactional. Like you have some faith that they're gonna be with you
Yeah.
even at the other end of that. And I I don't know. I that's just really it strikes me that that's um congruent with an immigrant experience when you're othered in a society. You're together, and it actually allows for pushing the envelope or put I don't know or like the whole
Yeah.
group can take a leap in a way that today, at least in my own world and experience of it's like you're just trying to like create bonds across difference, like
Right.
to
Right.
like throw something back at them and test that bond is almost like gosh, like that doesn't I don't know that that would work.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, I think that's, uh, yeah, the what was kind of one of the really special things is like you have this kind of perfect thing happening, right? Where you've got the audience and the artists immigrated together,
Yeah, right.
and they've all gone through this really heavy and
Yeah, yeah,
intense
yeah, yeah.
thing. And
Yeah,
and the what it is to immigrate, to leave,
yeah,
to go to lands unknown, whatever it may become, is so scary,
yeah,
and it's
yeah,
full of, and there was so much poverty and hardship, and it's all concentrated, and Jews were concentrated in this very, like, basically like a square mile, a little bit
hmm
more than that, and they've all these theaters are right there. So the theater was able to serve as a dialogue within, as like that is like that's that ultimate place, right? Like, yeah, I mean, I think this is what you're saying, right? Is like to be the storytellers within the family, and to really, and so all these reference points or all these shared references and shared experiences
yeah,
that can be told in a lot of different ways, and all this need, the
yeah.
need to for solace, the need to be, to be seen, to see on stage other people suffering.
But to also to be like a fan, like you just said, like it almost requires family to say to the family, "I'm offering you something you don't know you need,"
Yeah.
which is really what he was saying, right? Like this is different, but go with me. Like this might actually serve you. That I don't know. Today
There's a depth, yeah,
there's a
there's a depth
depth.
of it, but but
Yeah.
I want to say though also, because that wasn't always the case. He
Hmm.
had to confront some of the same things you're talking about, because what happened was in the beginning, and at certain points, when you're doing theater for a lot of people who've just arrived and don't speak English and are just holding on to something, that's one kind of audience, and that was a lot of why it was successful in the beginning. So you got people who are barely, and Yiddish is a unifier. That is,
Yeah.
oh, this is a shared language. Whatever country you're coming from, Jews are
Yeah.
speaking Yiddish, and so they
Yeah.
can connect through the language. But as Jews start to assimilate, and the audience, make the next generation is making more money, and they're moving out of the downtown area, and and they're going to the theater less, and then it starts to getting into those same things, like, okay, well, am I going to go there? Am I going to go to that play? Is it going to entertain me? Is it
Right.
going to, and so all those same fracturings
Hmm.
start to happen, where you start to start choosing material more transactionally. What is going to, so it's still there. But in that moment, yeah, yeah, absolutely. To be able to just say, we're doing something different now. Go
Yeah.
with me on
I,
this.
I guess what I'm so I mean amazed by and wonder about is how it happens that a new form arrives. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
and sometimes it's just the charisma and talent of a visionary artist, but even then, it's sort of in tension with, reaction to, in conversation with somehow like the new tidal wave of a cultural change. Like and or it's like this, where like in the middle of something, it's someone being like, I I've seen something you haven't seen. Go with me. Like
Right.
this can kind of get us there as a new way to perceive the world. Um, and
But it also counts on, because like in your situation, right, if you were to do that, like the vocabulary of theater has to also be a shared vocabulary. Like
yeah,
the start of the conversation is, I know what you all are into now. You
right,
can't say that to your audience. You don't
right,
know.
right.
You've got
Yeah,
like there's 100 people sitting in the house. You don't know what they're all into.
yeah,
One
yeah,
person over there, all they care about is musicals. The other person
yeah,
over there, all they want is Shakespeare. Another person over there is all they just
yeah,
seen a play for the first time in their life. So but
yeah,
when you step out and like, I know you've seen me on stage in 30 plays,
yeah,
and I know what your favorites are. And I know if we do that one, you're all going to sing along.
yeah,
I get
yeah,
that. But you don't know that. You
right,
can't start from that place. You could
yeah,
sort of at this point.
sort of.
You've got enough of a group, and you kind of did that a little bit when you did Exodus to Eden. I was
Mhm.
at that reading, and it was a little bit of that feel, like,
Yeah,
"Hey, everybody, I'm trying this thing out. Please come
yeah,
along with me on it."
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah, it takes trust. I mean, and
Yeah,
it takes enormous trust and sort of risk and but but also there's a cultural base or something that you get then to like leap off from or push the envelope from or
for
some
sure.
or find the next stage of or something. And now in the United States it's very difficult to find any common ground even among like here in the Bay Area where
Sure.
we sort of ostensibly all agree on a lot of the politics or mostly. Even then
Yeah.
it's very difficult, and I think it just makes it hard for theater to really find a new thing. You know what I mean? Like you end up
Yeah.
having to like try and I don't know. I don't. It's hard for me to articulate it, but
Yeah, and I don't, I mean, I think the new thing, when there is a new thing, yeah, there's somebody who's articulating it, putting it out there, making the choice to drive it, but I don't think it exists without a groundswell, without something
Mhm.
going on
Yeah,
that's already, that the artists tap into something, they
yeah,
don't invent it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
he'd been working on that for his whole career. So he was always
Mhm.
looking for, how do I get that happening? And
Yeah,
he reached out to the playwright, and so
yeah.
it was, and he wasn't the only one who was thinking that way.
Right,
And so that means there were also people in the audience for
yeah,
sure who were
yeah,
craving that as
yeah.
well. And a lot of people wouldn't go to Yiddish theater. A lot of Jews were like, "That's a bunch of crap. Why am I going to go
Mhm.
to that? That's just cheap, entertain the masses crap." There's that attitude, as
Mhm.
well. So, yeah.
Yeah.
There's another thought to share with you, which is, there's a piece that I'm also really interested in learning more about that I don't really know yet, which is, I get a lot of how Yiddish theater and Jewish artists influenced Hollywood, but Hollywood was like almost like a totally separate track than Yiddish theater. And I started thinking about like the nature of what film is. It's changed a little bit now, but the nature of what theater is and what film is, because I hear that partly in how you're talking about things. Yiddish theater was focused about, it was in Yiddish. It was about Jewish culture. It was talking to
Yeah.
Jews, telling Jewish stories, and which was revelatory and enjoyable and all those things. Film, because that's, obviously way before television. Film is about a fantasy world. Film is, these all these Jews coming in, like imagining what would it be like to be these wealthy white people, like to be
Mhm.
that. And so you think about those movies in the 20s and 30s and how much there was opulence, and these Cary Grant characters and how they moved and behaved in this mid-Atlantic accent. This is all total fiction, but there's a lot of Jews creating. The
Yeah.
head of the studios, the producers, the people choosing which story to tell, are
Yeah.
Jews.
I Yeah, it makes me think. Yeah,
Just to
yeah.
finish with them, like, so you have this kind of film which is more about, I don't know, imagining something beyond, and theater, which is a grappling with the current
Mm,
in the and the what are we really going through right now?
right, right, right.
They function differently to this day
Yeah.
in that way.
Yeah. Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think that what we were saying reminds me of this like Walter Benjamin essay, which I don't even know if I've read the whole thing, but I've read things about this essay. But it's basically like about reproduction, and he was grappling with photography and film. And it's the aura of the original is what he's sort of grappling with. Like, why do
Mm,
you need if the Mona Lisa can just be reprinted, why do you need to go see the original one anymore?
yeah,
You
yeah,
know? And he argues that like in the aura of the original, it's of what he calls the cult. But he doesn't mean cult like we think of it today. He means like cult, he means like community. He means like it's of it
mm,
it's like, someone in a culture in a community putting something out from that culture and community, and it's of that thing. Versus
hmm,
once it's reproduced, it's mass, it becomes a product, and the mass distribution of it it becomes a completely different thing. And I think like in a way that's
yeah,
this. Like Hollywood is a mass distribution, and so you're
yeah,
becomes political, not spiritual. And his argument was the
yeah,
aura of the cult is spiritual. It's a spiritual thing. And when the Yiddish theater is presenting Yiddish work, they're also keeping that culture alive,
right,
and they're speaking back to the culture and trying to
yeah.
keep that as a live thing. And I think that somewhere in there, around that question of culture, is when you get to push something forward. And weirdly, even though film, I think is wonderfully inventive, because it's mass distribution, you literally are appealing to the every
Sure.
like there's not that direct, well, this either speaks to me or doesn't speak to me moment. And today I think it's almost like we flipped. We're so in mass media, like
Yeah,
everyone's swimming in it, and we don't actually. I think we need that sort of the aura of the original kind of thing to be like, wait, who are we? Like
right.
what is this culture? And you can kind of feel it. Like Oakland is different than Berkeley, different than Hayward. There is a thing, there is difference there, but it's hard to really get that expressed in true vibrancy or in a way that you kind of feel the
And
pulse
we're
of.
very transient. Humans are very transient. We don't
Yeah.
stay long enough of us staying long enough in one place in a way to
Or
evolve
like have enough
culture.
of a, yeah, shared language in the literal sense or the proverbial sense of like
Right.
what it is that we're all in.
It's
Um,
like the news, like everybody watches national news, but if you really want to know what's going on, find out what the mayor just said in your town or what the city council just voted on.
yeah,
But we
yeah,
don't. Like
no,
very few of us even pay attention to
yeah.
that. But if you want to actually know why your street is whatever it is,
Or I would even go one further. Like whenever I just walk the streets, like I'm not driving, I'm walking the streets. I'm like, oh,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
oh, this is
sure.
Oakland. Like this is where I live. I mean,
Right.
versus like so much of our day can just be not that. If
Yeah.
for a lot of middle class people. Um, well, so what's next up for your book? So basically, if someone's listening to this who wants to fund translations.
Yeah, well, money is needed for translations. That would be very welcome. My what I really want to do, I think what I've written is about, if you once you sort of scale it down to the book size and all that, I think I've written probably about 80 pages or so that I feel is part of about a 250-page book.
Hmm.
And so the I definitely I'm hoping to get a publisher, obviously.
Yeah.
And then the creative move is to get a bunch of translating done and just kind of more of what it already is with certain areas that I want to like the art, talk more about the art form itself, and get into that, and a little more of the story of my uncle. The book is divided into, like, I do a brief history on Yiddish theater, a brief history on the history of the Yiddish language, a little bit about Jewish culture and this whole transformation, because you can't really talk about Yiddish theater without talking about that. So I kind of give the context of his life, which is like perfectly aligned with like he died at the age of 70, I think it was, which is almost the exact same 70 years of Yiddish theater, and his father was an actor. So there's a lot of, so it's a great arc to tell that story. And but then the main body is actually his story. There's this, and it's kind of my story. It's like I think the book is kind of a dual memoir. It's because I talk about my discovery. Everything I've shared with you is in the book. I mean, I talk about how I discovered it.
Yeah.
And that story of my discovery and realizing that there's this whole story that hasn't been told. And, my encountering of Jewish culture from my own experience, is huge, because it's, I mean, that's a whole other conversation just about being Jewish and today and what that means to me, and what I've learned about that is a lot. There's just a lot there with that. It's some funding, more writing, and a book deal. And anybody, I'll do the writing. If somebody else will take care of the rest, that'd be awesome.